I want to invite two special guests on stage to share some fun stories and the past, present, and the future of Web3. So without further ado, please welcome Hayden Adams, the CEO of Uniswap Labs, and Karl Floersch, CTO of OP Labs, on stage. We're going to do some questions. Hey, hey, hey.
Hello.
Hey, hey.
All right, so this is a really interesting time. People are somewhat talking about the markets, but we don't see any of that in this room. This is more than we've ever had in any room or any place in the world in terms of developers. And you two have been a unique part of that history, so I want to talk about how some of these things happen and what to look forward to. So let's start off by some intros. But let's make that interesting. So Karl, tell us about how you got into this space and how you know Hayden.
All right. So I am Karl. I work on Optimism, and I have known Hayden for, we calculated it literally over there, 9 years. 9 years. That's a while. And we first met each other in college. I knew his roommate. He's a mechanical engineering major. I knew his roommate because he was a comp sci major, and so I chilled with his roommate because I'm a comp sci major, because yeah. And then I met him. And then I was like, yo, you should live in my suite, because my suite's way better than yours. And so he came over to mine. And then I kind of got deep into Ethereum in about 2015, absolutely deep. And Hayden was my low-key rock, you know? He was kind of my dude. And I just could not stop talking about Ethereum every single day to Hayden. I am so sorry. In fact,
it's a massive understatement.
This is true. I was like, oh yeah. I feel like Hayden may have, just from our hangs, like gotten more than like a deep, like just absurd crash course. Like that's all we talked about for a very long time.
Yeah, I'd say there was like two things Karl said to me every day. Was one, I should stop being a mechanical engineer and I should start coding. And two, I should be more into Ethereum. This was all the way back starting in 2015, but it persisted for several years.
That was good advice.
Yeah, persisted until about 2017. I was, at that point, we had both graduated. He had just moved from he had gone to Consensus, and then he had gone to the Ethereum Foundation afterwards. And he was now working on writing the Casper FFG smart contract. And I was working at Siemens doing, boring heat flow analysis. And I got laid off, 1 year into working there. I don't think I was very good at my job. And Karl was very happy. The first thing that Karl said to me was like, this is the best thing that has ever happened to you. Because now you can work in Ethereum and you have no excuse not to. And I kind of took it and ran with it, for what it's worth. At that point, I think he had actually converted me over. Took years of wearing me down, but the idea of building smart contracts and applications that were unstoppable, that people could use and interact with each other, and didn't need to trust each other, but could engage in complex interactions, was like pretty cool. And so I'd say I was pretty won over.
So maybe you're just going to walk us through how did that lead to Uniswap?
So the way that led to Uniswap, and I think we can probably go back and forth to get through both of our stories, but I'd say that the way that led to Uniswap is about 3 months in to learning Solidity, and for what it's worth, the developer resources at the time were very, very sparse. I initially learned Solidity basically through like a small blog post that Karl had written, and like
so did I.
Yeah, Karl had written a blog post that was like the very basics of using Remix, connecting it to MetaMask, deploying a smart contract, and then like maybe 1 or 2 YouTube videos, but it was really sparse at the time. And I felt like I needed something a little bit more to like learn. I felt like I was stalling in my progress. I actually shouldn't even take credit. Karl was like, the way that you stop stalling in your progress is you have a side project that like focuses you. And so, I was looking for a side project, and maybe Karl can come to like how it got recommended to me, but essentially Karl pointed me to a blog post from Vitalik talking about like a new way to do exchange on Ethereum. And so I decided to start implementing it, and eventually that became Uniswap. I don't know if you have context there.
I could give some extra deets. So I was working at the Ethereum Foundation, traveling around the world with Vitalik. Now, Vitalik knows how to travel. He is a beast. I mean, seriously. So anyway, I was just barely keeping up with him. But we were like giving talks, and in between giving these conference talks, Vitalik was saying, hey, no one has built the most dead simple, like the most obvious, like this, of all of the designs of a decentralized exchange, there is this one design, and it is called the constant product market maker, and it is the best design by far, and no one's made it. You need to find someone, or you should build this, like someone should build this, like we need to fund this. And by the way, this is a public good, right? He was saying that even back then. And so I found someone to build it. David Knott. Actually, the first implementation was David Knott. Shout out to David Knott, Coinbase.
Respect.
But
I usually don't say that one.
The second person to implement this, no, actually the first person to implement it was Vitalik actually wrote a quick prototype in Viper, which of course was a language that he also built himself. Literally, just savage individual. But then Hayden was the most clear-cut, obvious choice, right there, like waiting, hungry to actually take a project and run with it. And so I was like, hey.
Yeah, cool. So Karl convinced me to build Uniswap. And I basically spent the next few months building out like a prototype. Actually, he told me that if I built a demo in a month, he would talk about it on stage at DevCon 2. So I basically wrote the first version of the Uniswap smart contracts and my first website, which was like a simple create React app. I didn't even know how to use components. So it was just one long file, one long like app.js file. And I created like a dead simple interface for Uniswap, and he talked about it on stage at DevCon 2. And then from there, a few people reached out to Karl to be connected to me, and then I started going to Ethereum conferences, ETH Global events and other events. Shout out ETH Global, and started to become more ingrained in the Ethereum community. And I eventually met Vitalik, got an Ethereum Foundation grant, eventually finished building Uniswap and launched it. But
no, it's incredible. What we're going to try to do is the timeline intersection here a bunch of times. So maybe in parallel, Karl had it working from Casper to Optimism or Plasma to Optimism. How did that happen?
Oh, wow. All right. Well, started out building Casper. This is the early Ethereum proof of stake protocol, learning all about consensus algorithms, learning all about decentralization, and implemented this alpha Casper testnet. So, implementing fork choice with proof of stake, validators, all this kind of stuff. But after having implemented that, it was pretty clear that Ethereum itself, the core protocol, could not scale. And I like using things, I like interacting with things, and I got a little disillusioned because Casper is more about security. It's like hypothetical stuff. It's, this application, but it doesn't make your average dApp a huge amount better, right? The average dApp is still gonna be expensive if Ethereum cannot scale. And so I was like, okay, let me get into scalability. So it was ETH2 consensus protocols, ETH2 sharding protocols with Justin Drake. He came in and he just described all this amazing stuff, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But I am extremely impatient, and I do not want to wait for sharding and hard forks and governance and like, oh my God, I'm just so bored by governance. So what I wanted to do was build in layer 2. You don't have to wait. You don't have to, this is permissionless innovation. So with the help of Ben Jones, Jinglan Wang, Kelvin Fisher, we started Plasma Group. And Plasma Group was this layer 2 scalability company. But guess what happened? Hayden Adams comes again. He strikes again because we built Plasma, or we created a Plasma testnet. And then we showed our Plasma testnet to Hayden. And you know what Hayden said? He said, that's nice, but can it run Uniswap? And we were like, it could and it couldn't really. So we went back to the drawing board and we came up with this generalized version of Plasma, and it had all these things, and it was really cool. It was like programmable. You could deploy Plasma contracts. And then we went up to Hayden again. We're like, check this out. And Hayden was like, cool. Can it run Uniswap? And our spirits were at the bottom. We nearly gave up on scalability. No, we didn't give up yet. But we came back. We were like, and boom. This is what led us to optimistic rollups. This is why we were like, we should call them optimistic because we're pretty optimistic people. So we called them optimistic rollups because #branding. And we showed it to Hayden and we're like, can it run Uniswap? And then he asked, of course, can it run Uniswap? And we're like, heck yeah, it can run Uniswap. So we were like, let's call it optimistic rollups, and let's create a company called Optimism, and let's inject some vibes in this place.
And here we are.
Here we are.
Yep.
Okay, so it's an interesting point that you brought up, and obviously I asked this with benefit of hindsight, but as you both were doing this, was the intention to ever create a company out of this, like implementing a working prototype from a blog post to getting Uniswap to run on a scalability solution?
I don't think for either of us the intention was ever to work at companies or create companies. I think for both of us, we were at the time pretty obsessed with Ethereum in our respective ways. I was, I had this grant funding. I thought maybe Uniswap would always be funded by grants. I wasn't really sure. And I was just most interested in trying to make something work, and thought maybe after I proved that it would work, maybe someone would hire me at their crypto project. It was more for me a proof of concept.
To learn and broaden.
Yeah, I think that the backdrop was that there were 3 or 4 other decentralized exchanges at the time that had raised between $40 and $153 million. And I sort of assumed one of them would win, and that Uniswap was kind of more of a proof of concept for something that was built on top of Ethereum, but was as decentralized as Ethereum itself. And it was less about efficiency or even just
scalability of it.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to build a business. I was just saying can we build something that's as decentralized as Ethereum, that is on top of Ethereum? And then can answer Karl's for him a little bit, which was that originally they formed the Plasma Foundation or something. Plasma Group, which was a nonprofit foundation, and that's how they originally set out to build it. But I think what we both learned is, and I think Karl has a lot of opinions on public goods funding, but I think what we both learned is, when I went back to apply for another grant, it wasn't going to be big enough to fund development of Uniswap v2 or all the things that I wanted to build. And when Karl was at Plasma Group and they were looking for funding, it wasn't going to be enough to fund what they were working on. And so that is what led to the initial seed round where I formed a company, and at the time there was no business model in mind or anything, but it was hey, this idea is really cool. People are building on top of it. When Uniswap launched, there was this immediate developer community because I was only developer on it, and I wasn't really a developer. And when there was a bug, there was no one to fix it, and when there was no analytics, and so someone had to build analytics, and so there was this natural grassroots thing.
And that's an interesting point too, because obviously the world was entirely different a few years ago from a developer tooling standpoint, resources available, other opportunities. if you could kind of come back or go back in time and kind of give yourself a piece of advice on what would you have done differently for your own progress about either Optimism or Plasma or Uniswap, what would you tell yourself?
You want to go first?
You can go first if you have an idea.
Advice. I don't know. It's a little bit hard to give. I feel like it's worked out pretty well, and I'd say that like I would probably. I think that I would probably tell myself to get less distracted by really short-term things. Things that were like short-term incentives or short-term ideas or narratives or one person getting mad at me on Twitter and then getting roped into it. I think I wasted a lot of time arguing with people on Twitter over random shit that ended up not mattering at all.
Welcome to the internet.
Okay, yes. So, yes, no short-term thinking, long-term, steady build, sustainability. That is one thing for sure. The other thing is the simpler the protocol, the simpler the expression of the protocol,
Agreed.
the better. So I would go back and I would tell my old self the koans that the wise sage GeoHot told me. GeoHot being a hacker. Great dude. Anyway, his koans were, there are two of them. One, the fool goes and, okay, the wise person, I don't really know the whole saying, but basically, the wise person spends, to cut down a tree, spends 7 hours sharpening the blade and 1 hour chopping down the tree. The dumb person, spends like 24 hours chopping down the tree with a dull blade. Okay, what does that mean? That means that you need to be planning and thinking about what you're going to execute on for way longer than you expect. Like iteration and experimentation, you do need to absolutely do that, but thinking really clearly about a simple and elegant solution to a problem is a way to have way more impact with way fewer lines of code. So the second koan is every line of code is worth $100. So think about it that way. Like when you are thinking about a solution, you spend 7 hours sharpening the blade, and then you write very few lines of code to actually solve the root of the problem. And that, like those ingredients allow you to solve mega problems that otherwise would not be possible.
That's a really, really good answer. That's much better than mine. I'm jealous.
It doesn't actually work at a hackathon.
Yes. No, I agree. I think simple solutions, always the best.
So this creates an interesting conundrum because obviously we have the benefit of hindsight, but in that world when you're trying to figure out anywhere from elegant solutions to just waiting for certain things to happen for you to kind of get the prerequisites you need, how do you think about staying motivated or not losing track or falsely kind of making a short-term decision? Like, do you have any frameworks or just overall, like, how do you kind of think about making that type of decision? It's a very open-ended question and a hard one.
How do you stay motivated when? That is a good question. I think for me, the thing that kept me motivated was I was really excited and interested in what I was working on. And so I think that like whatever you're working on, I think that like I don't think it's good to be like lukewarm on it or like I think that to like put in like the time and the energy, you have to be like interested and excited by it. Because if you're interested and excited by it, it will feel a lot more natural. I don't know, that's my take.
Nice. How I stay motivated is I stay optimistic. Okay, no. Here's the framework that I use.
Wink.
Framework that I use really is there are two options, right? You can either be optimistic and think that you can have an impact and think that you can do things and actually make a change, or you can be pessimistic and not think that the world can be made better. And the thing about being optimistic is that how are you going to make the world a better place? How are you going to actually have an impact if you don't believe in yourself to make that impact? Turns out the word optimized is actually to act as an optimist. You make something better because you see a path to a better future. So the thing that keeps me optimistic is not necessarily that we are going to survive the next year as a species. I have no idea. But what keeps me optimistic is I definitely know that if we do not survive as a species in a year from now, but we were working to make the world better, then I feel pretty happy about the journey that I was on throughout that whole process. Because it's fun. I mean, I want to help, like, this ship is sinking, right? And I want to, like, plug holes as we go down with the ship. Like, I'm ready. I mean, we might make it to shore, but, like, at least we'll be plugging holes. It'll be crazy. It'll be fun. We can chant and stuff.
He's always been like this.
I think we should think about it from counting lines and $100 as a diff. Well, speaking of exciting things, Uniswap recently acquired Genie. Tell us about how that decision happened and what do you plan on doing with this acquisition?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, Genie is an NFT marketplace aggregator. And so, you have a bunch of different NFT marketplaces like OpenSea and LookRare and Rarible and Coinbase NFT and all that. And Genie is a website you go and it lets you trade across all of them at once. So the reason that it was so exciting for me and for our team is one that we shared a vision, and what that was is really the reason that I'm not excited about ERC20 tokens in the abstract. I'm not excited about any of this stuff in the abstract. I'm excited about what Web3 and this technology enables, and so one of the things I'm really excited about is the same way that like the internet democratized access to information, to me, Web3 is about democratizing access to ownership and value creation. And so to me, ERC20 tokens are interesting because they are a means of digital ownership and a means of, expressing value and creating value, and making ownership and value more accessible to more people. And to me, NFTs represent basically the exact same thing. And when I think about what we do at Uniswap Labs, it's not just about building efficient protocols to back Web3. It's about explicitly with the intention of making it's not there's protocols, there's interfaces, there's developer things in between. And what we're most interested in is the impact that we have and the ability to make Web3 more accessible. And so, Uniswap protocol has pretty high market share. Like, it's definitely possible to make more efficient trading protocols. But to us, what we've started to feel is that the barrier to entry, the thing that's holding back Web3 is not necessarily efficiency at the trading protocol level, but how accessible it is.
Access on its own is the barrier.
Yeah, and so I think that Web3 or NFTs, ERC20 tokens, there are two different ways to represent value and ownership, both really valuable, and we're really excited about over this next year transitioning from just building protocols to building protocols, but also building the interfaces, the developer-facing interfaces, the user-facing interfaces, and more to make it more accessible to more people.
So maybe, I guess, beyond NFT marketplace integration, what else is cooking?
I think, I can't, there's only so much alpha I can leak at once, but what I'll say is that, we do want to just continue to press on, one thing cool about NFTs is that I think that there's a lot of room for, right now they're viewed as ERC20 tokens and NFTs are, two very different ecosystems. People view it, there's we are having right now, this is more of a DeFi thing, and earlier this week we had the NFT thing, but I think that it's all building towards a shared future and a shared internet of ownership. And so I think that's something we're really excited about, is starting to try to bring the two things together, as well as implement more of I think the same way that the internet is.
Is that a protocol and a product argument, or just the product side of it?
Protocol, product, all of it. But I think that just like the internet, Web3 is going to be very social. It's going to be very community-based. It's not, the lines aren't going to be ERC20 and NFT. It's going to be, The communities are going to need both. And so, figuring out the ways to make both of them more accessible in unified experiences is something that's really exciting to us.
Can't wait to try this out. This is going to be fun. For a world that's ready for this, how do you kind of think about the future of scalability, Karl?
Wait, for a world that's ready?
Or just a lot more social behaviors and a unification and just access? How do we think about L2s evolving?
Oh, I mean, how else are you going to transact? You need the base layer to scale. Okay. I'll just say, okay, a future here. Without question, Ethereum, layer 2s, we will scale. In fact, we will scale to a point where we can support as much demand as we can support with literal hardware, right? So horizontal scalability, making sure that the cost of a transaction is not proportional to the, this massive amount of demand for this single, the single chain, but instead the cost of a transaction, at least for cheap transactions that are not related to arbitraging a really volatile asset, right? That's always going to be expensive. But for your average, game, for your average, even just a social interaction, that needs to be dirt cheap. That needs to cost essentially the cost of the bare metal. And so we are building out that experience, but that does not mean that we need to fracture our, ecosystem into a lot of different separate chains and networks and all that kind of stuff. As Hayden was saying, we need to have a consistent experience, a unified experience, an intuitive experience, and that unified intuitive experience needs to be supported on the back end and the infrastructure. Just like we have front ends that are unified, we also need our back ends to be expressive enough so that it can support it. And so that's what we're building. We're building this. It's gonna be crazy the amount of transactions that are gonna go on in
Optimism.
layer 2. On Optimism. That is absolutely right. Thank you.
Not shilling if I do it for him and he does it for me.
Oh, yeah.
The test really is it must always be able to run Uniswap in any form. Because the test becomes, can it run Uniswap in any form, in any shape, in any size?
Yes.
And then you've passed the L2 bottleneck. Tell us more about Bedrock.
Oh yeah, okay. So, Bedrock, what does it invoke? It evokes a foundation. What is Bedrock? Bedrock is the foundational roll-up client for literally all L2s. And by the way, I'm not just talking about optimistic roll-ups. I'm talking, it'll be in the future ZK roll-ups, all the kinds of roll-ups, as long as they are EVM equivalent. Bedrock is that foundation. So what is Bedrock really? Okay, Geth is what runs the EVM. Again, gonna get a little technical here. To make Geth run in layer 2, we were able to get the lines of code down to 400 lines of code. That means that you can look at the diff and you can say, okay, I know Geth runs in production. These are the changes that need to be made to get Geth running in layer 2. Boom, I understand what layer 2 is doing. I understand the protocol, making it simple and approachable. Why did we do this, you might ask?
Why?
Great question. Because GeoHot came up and he was like, yo, your code is way too complicated. There are way too many lines. You need to cut this down by 10x for it to be even remotely ready for a full production, life-changing, world-changing protocol. And so what we did is we spent the next 7 hours sharpening our axes, and we chopped those lines of code down to that 400 number. And it has been a Goliath task, but it will now serve as the basis, the bedrock, of an enormous amount of innovation in the layer 2 space. You can now understand what layer 2 is really doing and hack on it. So take a look, read the code. It's one commit. It's crazy.
That is crazy. And I've read that and it blows my mind that you can do that and spark such a massive change.
It's shocking that when you look at a very small line like diff, how much more work that took. Like, it's like you want every line of code to take hours.
Addition by subtraction.
Addition through subtraction. Wow, my God, we're making the iPhone of Geth clients.
Well, is there something both of you disagree on?
Huh?
Either of you, do you disagree on anything amongst each other, whether it's a principle or an approach or a direction? Very open-ended.
Yeah, I'd say Karl, I don't want to say he's more optimistic than me. I think I'm like reasonably optimistic, and I am a big believer in
I think he wins that game by default.
being optimistic. But I think sometimes, this is kind of abstract and opaque. I think we agree on a lot of things, but I think sometimes we disagree about like the inevitability of things. I think sometimes Karl is like, well, it's inevitable that all these huge forces will move together to like this end result. There's sort of like path independence of like societal forces. And I'd say that like for me, I feel like things are a little bit more path dependent. Like individual I'm not saying that like, yeah, but I don't know. That's kind of a weird abstract answer.
We disagree, but agree, we're like,
Yeah.
But I will say that I am obsessed, and I am obsessed with thinking from first principles, thinking about like math, using that to inform my decisions. And that is why I feel like overconfident sometimes, but nah, I'm not I'm just in the right amount. But I feel overconfident in like making insane bets. Like I'm like retroactive public goods funding. Vitalik said retroactive public goods funding to me and like explained it. And I was like, that is it. And I am like I'm mad. Everything is retroactive public goods funding. It's just like a pursuit of that.
Tell us more about what that is, how and why is that set up, and your role in that.
Great question. Well, retroactive public goods funding, it's really, it's in the name. The idea is that you retroactively reward public goods. But what does that do, right? You're retroactively rewarding public goods. Well, what it does is in the long term, it means that people who are building public goods know that they can get retroactively rewarded. Why do we want this? Well, we want impact to equal profit. Right now, there's a big problem and this is actually what Hayden was alluding to earlier with the formation of Uniswap and the formation of, from the transformation from Plasma Group to Optimism, is that Ethereum back in the day did not have sufficient public goods funding sources. If you wanted to make Ethereum better, that impact would not result in profit. And that's a problem in Ethereum, but it's also a huge problem in our society. Generally, when you think of profit, you think of exploitation, you think of extractive behavior. That is bad news. That is going to lead us down these pessimistic paths. So we need to make sure that positive impact results in profit. And so retroactive public goods funding is the long-term way that we can actually make it so that people know if I have that positive impact, I will be able to get rewarded through these mechanisms, through public goods funding channels, and make that thing pop.
And there's been a couple attempts by the Optimism side. Tell us more about what's happened and how it was structured.
Yes, indeed. So we have done our retroactive public goods funding round 1. That was $1 million. It was quite a few months ago. We are now going to do the second iteration of retroactive public goods funding, and it is going to be way more legit. We are improving the quadratic voting mechanism. We are making the interfaces really, really quite nice. And we are going to be using it as the launching of the Citizens House in a very small form. So what is the Citizens House? Optimism, the Optimism Collective, the governance system for Optimism, the layer 2, has 2 houses. 1, tokens. 2, citizens. We need identity solutions. So we are allowing the citizens, those are the people who will be directing these retroactive public goods funding. Because we don't want our public goods, we don't want those to be judged by token holders. That's like a plutocracy. We don't want the people who have the money to say what the public goods are, right? That doesn't make sense. We want the human beings, the individuals, to direct those funds. So retroactive public goods funding and the Citizens House is coming soon.
So for what it's worth, we have seen some of these like retroactive public goods funding forces in action. An example is that like a lot of DeFi protocols are seen as public good infrastructure. And what happened with the Uni token launch was that
Airdrops is a variation of that.
Yeah. Everyone who had ever used the protocol in the early days, who added a huge amount of value and helped get the thing off the ground, was rewarded when the token launched. And there was and then since then, what has happened? More people have started using DeFi protocols earlier, speculating that they'll be rewarded. And so that's essentially a kind of a hint of what retroactive public goods funding looks like. But then what they're talking about is like making it more explicit and having actual funds that go out and find whoever is doing the most public good and just paying them money for nothing.
I know this opens up a slightly bigger can of worms, but how do you sort of subjectively assess the impact? Because a lot of things are in that category.
That is the ultimate question. It is incredibly hard. If we can assess the impact we can't do it objectively. That is just fundamentally an impossibility result, because impact is fundamentally subjective based on your goals, your preferences. However, what we can do is we can start equipping every human being with stronger forms of identity so their voices can be heard. The big problem right now with assessing impact is determining who actually is what people's preferences are, what individuals' preferences are. And we have this horrible problem where we don't even know who is a human on the internet. So how are we going to, there's no way, we have no hope of assessing impact until we give people a voice. And so that is step one.
So does that mean you have to solve Sybil resistance before we get to solve retroactive funding?
Yeah, Sybil resistance is something that is not going to be solved. It's not like we
rather
flick a
improve
switch.
than solve.
But yes, we need to create Sybil resistant mechanisms before we can start to judge impact.
And Hayden, you have a thing about that.
What's that?
You have a solution for the problem.
For Sybil resistance?
Or potentially with Sybil.org.
Oh, yeah, I'd say that's very loosely a solution.
It is correct.
It's more of a way to people to link Twitter identity to Ethereum addresses. So I don't know if I want to show that as a true solve. For what it's worth, I don't know if you need to fully solve Sybil resistance.
Two things you disagree on.
Yeah, there you go. I think that again, it's not all that. It's not extremes in one way or the other. You could also just have some funding. You could have protocols vote on a.
You can tier up the amount, I guess.
Yeah, or you could do your best. You could YOLO your best, right? The Uniswap initial fee tier, 0.3%. It was a YOLO. It worked well enough for Uniswap V1, and I think you could kind of YOLO out a public goods fund that would improve things versus not having it. And maybe it doesn't go all the way to the we've solved all of society's problems, but it's a step.
And to be clear, we are not going to solve Sybil resistance before retroactive public goods funding round number 2. So
we got a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
We got 36 hours to hack.
Yeah, not happening. But the interesting thing is that this is actually something that kind of solves itself. It is an emergent property of everyone using systems, building better identity systems. Every single little impact counts. And by the way, we cannot solve Sybil resistance until we solve privacy-preserving Sybil resistance, because we are not trying to create some surveillance state.
Karl talks about retroactive public goods funding the way he used to talk about Ethereum in 2015.
And that's the alpha now. Uniswap also has a grants program. Tell us more about the Uniswap grants program.
Yeah, the Uniswap grants program is awesome, and there are multiple people here who are working on it. I'd say that decentralized governance is pretty hard. That's a general thing that the Ethereum community understands at this point. And there's different like levels of speed and cadence. And I think that one fairly effective thing is having a more slow system that like allocates out to faster systems. And so Uniswap governance has like infrequent governance proposals, but you can have infrequent high impact governance proposals, and then you could have those governance proposals fund other things that are much faster and higher impact. And the Uniswap grants program is in my mind one of the most successful governance proposals in all of Ethereum to date, because it's funded 122 different projects. And multiple teams that have then
probably on par with the foundation now, I think.
Yeah,
Wild.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And Uniswap started out as a grantee of the Ethereum Foundation, and Ken, who runs Uniswap grants, was on the along with you was on the grant committee at the Ethereum Foundation that got Uniswap its initial grant. But yeah, I mean, Ken and other people working at the at Uniswap grants have really funded tons of projects all around the world that have led to other companies and events and hackathons. And there was even like Unicode was a hackathon funded by Uniswap grants, and then there was like 3 or 4 that you were involved with. Then there were like 3 or 4 other projects that were created there that are now real companies that have raised rounds.
That's incredible. I don't think I knew this either.
Yeah, so it's like you can underestimate the impact, but this was one governance vote, one proposal, and it's impacted probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
Careers, measurable impact, just income, and just more things that are also intangible that just kind of came from that one decision. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know. I think that like hard to underestimate how important. Right, the Ethereum Foundation grant, spawning Uniswap, like it's hard to understate how important public goods grants are.
And I'll add to that, we as ETH Global also received a grant that started everything. ETH Global started off with $80,000 from the Ethereum Foundation, and here we are.
80,000 well spent.
Exactly.
Thank you. All right, I want to close off with one last question. There's there's over 1,000 developers here that are looking to get into Web3 and start their careers. Some are looking to get better at just Web3 development. Some are looking to start companies. Some are looking to just understand what's going on so they can think about moving over. If you were to start now as a developer, what would you recommend or advice you would give or resources you recommend, or what would you tell them to kind of stay involved in this space? And either of you can go first, and yeah, there you go. It's a tough one.
It is a tough one, and I'm not gonna lie, I gave some of my advice already. I mean, I was thinking when I was, stay optimistic, right? Of course, but I'll say a different thing. I'll just say one, do what you love. That's what Hayden said, right? It's really, the amount of energy that you can get from doing something that you really want and you really want to see happen is incredible. And also, make sure that you are doing things for the right reasons. I do think, I am an optimist. I do think that in the long term, if you work on just slow incremental progress, trying to get to something that is actually valuable, focusing on impact, what goes around comes around. People will start to notice, your friends will start to notice, you can bring your friends up, also spread the love, because everything is a community effort. We need to work together and support each other, because we're all in it. We're all in this experience together.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, one, like you never know what's gonna happen. I think me and Karl, we were over there talking right before this, and like we were kind of like, holy shit. These past few years have been really insane. And I don't think either of us really expected it to play out the way it did, or for us to be in the positions that we're in. And I think that it was like a combination of just like interest and passion, but also like luck and serendipity and like things kind of like, unexpected.
Don't forget the hard work.
Hard work for sure. But I guess like, again, maybe it speaks to the being optimistic thing, but like, like you don't really know how things are going to play out, and so I think that the most important thing is like coming in with like genuine intentions and like working, working towards something that is genuine and that you believe in, and maybe it will, you never really know what's going to happen. So.
I think experimentation over anything else
Yep.
probably leads to more creative outcomes. With that, Hayden, Karl, thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate you joining us
Thank
out in
you.
New York.